Hello and welcome. How has Brazil's standing on the international stage been affected by its nuclear deal with Iran? The increasingly influential South American country has made multilateral foreign policy the key to bridging diplomatic ties to over 40 countries. But Iran's nuclear ambition is a particularly sensitive matter for the USA.
And certainly we have very serious disagreements with Brazil's diplomacy vis-a-vis Iran. And we have told President Lula, I've told my counterpart, the foreign minister, that we think buying time for Iran, enabling Iran to avoid international unity with respect to their nuclear program makes the world more dangerous, not less.
Well, Brazil's President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Turkey's Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan have defended the accord, which they say makes sanctions unnecessary. Under the deal, Iran would agree to ship much of its low-enriched uranium to Turkey for storage and receive nuclear fuel rods in return. This is similar to a proposal initially put forward by the International Atomic Energy Agency with US support last October, but rejected by Tehran, which is continuing to develop its uranium enrichment program. The US says Tehran's stockpile has nearly doubled since last October, and according to the IAEA, is enough to make 2 nuclear weapons. Iran insists its program is for peaceful purposes. President Lula has received mixed feelings back home over this deal, raising questions of his legacy and the role of Brazil on the world stage. So today we ask, how will Brazil's nuclear deal affect the international stalemate over Iran's controversial nuclear program, and will America buy into the idea of outside intervention? Join our conversation with your questions and comments. Send an SMS or an email. Well, joining me from the capital city, Brasilia, is the Brazilian Foreign Minister Celso Amorim. He's convinced that the deal is an important step forward in negotiating a solution with Iran and should not be ignored. Minister, I welcome you to the show and ask if you feel this deal is going to go through 100% and be successful.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for receiving me at Al Jazeera. Let me just mention to you that the agreement was not our invention. We just took as a basis the agreement that was proposed by the so-called Vienna Group, which include the United States, Russia and France, plus the Atomic Agency, and we were able to remove all the doubts, all the questions that existed in relation to that agreement. These doubts and agreements or points of concern, whatever you want to call them, were all part of a letter of President Obama to President Lula, and a similar letter was sent also to the Prime Minister of Turkey. So, and this was always meant to be a confidence-building agreement. It's not to solve all the problems. We know there are other problems. We don't ignore them. But we always believed, and so we are also led to believe by our friends, that this would be a gateway to further negotiations if Iran accepted the conditions that indeed it accepted.
Well, Minister, what you're saying with this letter to the Brazilian president and the Turkish president suggests that the US was encouraging this and very much behind this idea.
Well, you know, you talk to several people in the United States, and I'm not saying that different people didn't say different things at certain points or make different comments, but the most authoritative document was a letter by President Obama. That's not a 6 weeks before, because some people had said that it had to be seen in context and so on, but this letter was 3 weeks before the trip of President Lula to Tehran. So we have to think and we have to suppose that a letter by a president is valid in itself, and it has not to be seen against the background of some comments made by other officials.
So, sir, how do you regard what seems to be a current mood now in Washington, D.C., that the deal isn't really a feasible one, that Iran is using perhaps this opportunity to stall and continue its stall on sanctions?
Okay, I have no intention to defend Iran, and I know it's very difficult. I know all the problems in the past. We don't ignore that. And we had a very prolonged negotiation with the Iranian authorities, not only in preparation to these discussions, but during the time in which President Lula and Prime Minister Erdogan were there. We had 18 hours negotiation. But in any case, I will just mention to you the person whom I think is the person who is best qualified to judge that and to have an evaluation of that, which is the former Atomic Agency boss, El Baradei. Dr. El-Baradei just gave an interview to a Brazilian paper, and it says clear, I can send you the English version if you wish, and it says clearly that this agreement is a satisfactory agreement and that it would be a gateway for further conversations, and that should be, with this agreement, there are no reasons for sanctions.
Minister, what changed?
But what will happen, I don't know, because of, yeah.
I was wondering
Please
what changed. What changed from last October when the deal, a very similar deal, was put forward? Why did Tehran accept the deal now? What changed to allow this to happen?
Well, I would say two things basically. 15 days before President Lula went there, I went to Tehran, and I had a very clear message, because President Lula before that had talked to the BRIC, the Russian and the Chinese leaders here, and it was clear for us that they were running out of time. So that may indeed have had an effect. But also the fact that Brazil and Turkey were not there imposing their views, but actually in a dialogue. We are also emerging countries, if you wish, and also because we put in an explicit way in the declaration the guarantee, which was very important to Tehran, that the light enriched uranium sent to Turkey would be given back to Iran in case the agreement doesn't go on.
Mm-hmm. Of course, what's happened in the 8 months or so since the first offer last October, Minister, it seems Iran has continued with its enrichment program, and that's caused obviously a lot of concern. How do you regard Iran's position now on how it's moved forward since that first offer and since the latest agreement?
Well, we know that's a concern. We know also that the 20% enrichment is a concern. We know that the discovery of the COM facility is a concern. By the way, the proposal of this agreement was made originally after the COM discovery took place, or it was materialized afterwards. So I think all these are concerns. But you know, as I said, we received a letter from the highest authority in the country that most concerned, and which doesn't refer to these points that you are mentioning. I don't ignore them, but they, once you create confidence on the basis of this agreement, which ensures three things that were never ensured before: that Iran accepted the quantity, that Iran would ship them to a foreign country, to in this case Turkey, without any preconditions, and that it would do it previously to their own, prior to their own receiving of the fuel rods that the West is promising it. So these three conditions were never there, and the fourth was a formal one, which was also expressed by President Obama and by others, is that Iran should write directly to the Atomic Agency. And it did, just 1 week after, as stipulated in our own declaration, just 1 week after the declaration.
Minister, what from your discussions with those in Tehran, what is expected by Iran? What is Iran looking for from this deal now?
Well, you know, I think the declaration in that respect is very telling also, because it was very clear to me during the negotiation and during these discussions that Iran wants to have an ambitious, peaceful, at least that's their contention, nuclear program, and in order to have that, they need the cooperation of the international community. They know it's impossible to them to have a purely endogenous program. They may have one of a sort, but it will not be as good. And if you read the declaration carefully, especially paragraphs 2 and 3, you'll see that this is the desire of Iran, a forward-looking process that would enable them to have greater cooperation with the international community. And it's obvious, this will only happen if the other points of concern are progressively solved. But you cannot have everything up front. The meaning of a confidence-building agreement is to build confidence. I mean, it's not to solve all the problems.
Does it bother you, or does it concern you, that America still seems to want to go ahead with sanctions against Iran, irrespective of this deal? I mean, isn't it going to make a difference?
Well, of course it bothers us, not because Brazil has any special interest. In this case, we have a special interest in maintaining peace. It's our obligation as members of the Security Council. But it bothers us because we have witnessed other situations, such as the one in Iraq, in which you had sanctions, and on top of sanctions, you would have a reaction from the other side, which would become more rigid, more hardliner. Then the requests for further, stronger actions would come, and we saw the disaster that happened in Iraq. And that's precisely what we would like to avoid.
Are you confident, Minister? I know you said earlier what Iran says it wants to, but are you confident personally that Iran will abide by its intention not to pursue a nuclear weapons program and restrict itself to nuclear power?
Well, you know, what we want is to use a verifiable agreement which is based on quantities and which can show that Iran will not be able to, and of course with the presupposition that inspectors, this is very important, would stay in Iran, so the quantity that remains in Iran, which is not, of course, sufficient, not even for one nuclear weapon, not to say two. I mean, it's maybe half, I don't know. But these would be under inspections of the atomic agency. And this is why the Director General, or the former Director General of the Atomic Agency, says that it's a confidence agreement, confidence building agreement. And a confidence building agreement is meant to build confidence. And that's what we want to see, based on concrete facts, not on declarations, intentions, nothing subjective.
Before we take a break, Minister, let me squeeze in a quick question we had from a viewer sent by Twitter to us. It's from Jonathan Soul in Washington, D.C., and he says, was Brazil surprised that Iran's nuclear deal they brokered with Turkey wasn't initially well received by the U.S.?
Well, we were disappointed. I think it would be a better expression than surprised. We are never surprised in international relations, but sometimes we have expectations that when we do things that others are expecting us to do, that these will be well received, and that, of course, that other concerns could be solved later.
Well, Minister, I have more questions for you. We continue our discussion on Brazil's nuclear negotiations with Iran in a moment. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Brazil is playing the tricky role of broker to find a solution to the international stalemate over Iran's nuclear ambitions. But how is that affecting the South American country standing with its allies, particularly with the United States? We're examining that with Brazil's Foreign Minister, Celso Amorim, who's joining us from his ministry office in Brasilia. He has criticized the new draft resolution for sanctions against Iran and says it ignores all and disregards all chances for a peaceful solution. Minister, a couple of questions from viewers, if I may get these to you in response to some of the things we've been discussing. The first one actually is from Ahmed Amir Omar, who sent this in through our Facebook page, saying the deal will only result in a negative relationship between the US, Brazil and Turkey.
Well, it shouldn't be the case. I mean, the first person who asked us to engage Iran and to help the United States engage Iran was President Obama himself. And in several contacts that we had, especially last year, there was a similar affirmation. It is true that more recently the United States and others embarked on this route, which we don't think it's positive because of all the precedents that we know, which is the route of sanctions. But you know, we are in the Security Council not to be just to say yes to whatever proposition is made. We are there to think with our own minds. And mind you, this is Brazil is not interested in confrontation. Neither, I believe, is Turkey, which is a member of NATO. So these are two independent thinking countries which don't want any confrontation with any Western country, but which want a peaceful solution for this situation.
Well, interestingly, another email that came in from Abdurrahman Ali Sheikh, who says this deal will not affect the relationship between the US and Brazil because Brazil will not bow down to pressure from the US. How has President Lula positioned himself when it comes to strengthening Brazil's position on the international stage?
Well, President Lula, of course, has always tried to have a very active foreign policy, and this was expressed in several fields. In the field of trade, in which Brazil has played a fundamental role in trying to have a fair result in the Doha round. It was in the climate, in which also Brazil was involved in the final negotiation of the accord, or so at least an imperfect accord, but that we get on Copenhagen. And we will also be interested and involved in themes that have to do with peace and security. We don't see why in any way the themes related to peace and security are the preserve of the permanent members of the Security Council, which coincidentally are the 5 countries that are admitted to have nuclear weapons by the NPT.
Now, of course, you have China and Russia very much on the scene here too, and the US has been looking for support from those two countries, which have been largely allies of Iran to some degree up to now. How has the dynamic with Russia and China's relationship with Iran helped your position in forcing Iran towards a deal?
Well, I'm not entitled to speak for them. I think they would prefer a peaceful and negotiated solution, and that's what they have been telling us. Probably they have assumed some commitments in relation to the United States or the other P3, so to say, which prevents them to go as clearly as we are going, like Brazil and Turkey, to the point. But, you know, we don't have the veto power, but we have the moral power, and that's what we are seeing recognized in the world, recognized by editorials of newspapers like Le Monde, by journalists like Roger Cohen of the New York Times, Philip Stevens of the Financial Times, and of course now by Al-Baradei, which is the most important one.
Now, there's been the shadow of military action against Iran as well. That's been spoken about a lot. Less so now, of course, under the Obama administration, but Iran was very much being targeted by the US with the potential of military action, perhaps even through Israel at one point. What would be Brazil's position if there was any stronger move towards a military solution to Iran's situation?
This would be a total disaster, and Brazil, of course, would never approve of such action in these conditions now. Mm-hmm. Of course, if they commit aggression to other countries, this is a different matter, which they haven't.
How do you feel in terms of getting all the parties in line then to make sure that this deal does build the confidence that you've been referring to? What will it take now for the next step? What would the next steps be to build the confidence that gets all parties in line with this deal?
Well, you know, in order to have an agreement, 2 or 3 things are required, but I'll mention 2. First, you have to have a good deal in its contents, and I think we have that. But you also need goodwill. You need men and women of goodwill to come to an agreement. The countermeasures, the sanctions, or the one that you mentioned, which I even hesitate to refer to, these are sometimes easier to resort to, but in a way they are not the best ones.
Of course, Minister, you made a very important point earlier about the steps forward not being based on rhetoric or you know, stated ambitions. But if you look at Iran's track record with the nuclear inspectors and with its negotiations and the toing and froing, how can you be confident that things can move in a positive direction and essentially Brazil won't be left in a situation where its moves were not vindicated?
Well, I have this Anglo-Saxon saying, we cross that bridge when we get there. I mean, now this was a gateway agreement, a confidence-building agreement. All the elements, all the essential elements, I would say all the elements that were proposed in October and which, according to our dialogue at the highest level, including by writing, continue to be valid, are there. So, and these are concrete elements, so these don't have anything to do with intentions, or it's a question of verification. Iran is saying that they will transfer 1,200 kilos to Turkey in 1 month after a positive response from the Vienna group. Well, if it doesn't, then of course the agreement is broken, unless it has to do with something that was previously agreed by the Western countries as well. So I think it's like that. It's very simple, very direct, and it was conceived in that way, and that's how we think it should be seen. I mean, its implementation would be self-explanatory. Of course, other issues will have to be discussed. We'll have to discuss the enrichment of 20%. We have to discuss the augmentation of inventories of uranium in Iran since last October. But as I said, we cannot solve all the problems at once. And the correspondence that we had between the 2 presidents indicates that this was the thought, or at least appeared to be the thought also, of the President of the United States.
Of course, Minister, Brazil has done fantastic with its economy, almost tripling its GDP in the last decade, and is a growing power, very visibly a growing power. When it comes to Brazil's own nuclear ambitions and nuclear program plans, where do you stand on that now?
Well, this is very easy. We just were active participants in the NPT. As you know, in Brazil, we have a very strong determination to have a peaceful nuclear program. We have, by the way, such a program. But it's also in our constitution that we cannot produce or use nuclear energy for military purposes. So I think this is very clear. What we think it is important to happen in this area, apart from non-proliferation, continued non-proliferation vigilance, if you wish, is the disarmament steps. And this is probably the best and most important thing that was reaffirmed now in the NPT review conference in New York.
Of course, so
which is supported which we supported wholeheartedly. And by the way, maybe we had a small hand in helping also others to support.
Well, of course, you know, you're very much at the cutting end of Brazil's new push for international diplomacy, with a stated push to try to build relations with not only Iran, but of course Israel and North Korea as well. It's going to put you in a very tricky position, even as foreign minister in particular, having to deal with these various tricky situations. How optimistic are you can build that kind of diplomatic liaison with some of these countries listed?
Well, you know, we have a capacity for dialogue which is historic in Brazil, because we have borders with 10 countries, and we haven't had a war of our own, let us see, in our region for 140 years. The only war that we were involved was the Second World War, in which we helped the Allied cause to defend democracy in Europe. But we are a country that are accustomed to negotiate. President Lula, who is a very experienced trade union leader, a politician who lost 3 elections before winning one, is also a man of dialogue and a man who is used to resolve things by negotiation, not by confrontation. Of course, that doesn't imply that we're not firm in our principles. So I think this is how we want to get there. And also because, as you said, Brazil is not only a big economy, but also an economy that's being able to solve the social problems, were the biggest handicap we had so far.
Can you get over what I think President Lula sees as the handicap of the United Nations being a very archaic organization, and make enough of a mark so that Brazil's voice is stronger and not manacled to some of the traditional allies?
Well, you know that we have been fighting for quite a while for a reform of the Security Council, but the more I see it, even the way the bargaining goes on in relation to this particular question, which in my opinion affects the very credibility of the Security Council, sometimes I have a philosophical question whether we should not be looking for a refounding of the United Nations. But in the meantime, maybe at least we can reform the Security Council and have broader views expressed among the permanent members.
Minister Celso Amorim, thank you very much for joining us. A pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for sending your questions in. Also, remember, you can follow the show on Facebook and see what we're up to there. You can give us your feedback on the program and post your questions and comments too. Well, of course, we also welcome your ideas. If you have one, email us at riz@aljazeera.net. But that's it for now from me and the team. We'll see you next time.